everyone. Welcome to Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell, another presentation from Inside the Birds. And of course, it's myself, Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan, and the man, the star of the show right there with the Adidas suit is Greg Cosell, who's going to help us now in episode 3. So
I got dressed up today for you guys.
You did. I love it, man. Very stylish. Very stylish. So this is episode 3. By the time we're done with this episode, I can't believe we'll be halfway through already, but we've got a lot to cover. As I tell you all the time, Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell drops 6 a.m. every Tuesday morning on all Inside the Birds platforms, our YouTube channel, our podcast platforms, so you can get it all there. And this week, we are going to talk about pass rushers, both interior, edge. They come in all shapes and sizes. We'll get into that with Greg in a minute. So we've done quarterbacks, we've done cornerbacks, and now we're going to get into pass rushers. This is an interesting kind of subject for us, Greg, because as I just mentioned, it's not like the 80s anymore where your defensive ends kind of came similar shapes and size. You got all sorts of guys. And so I'd like to start off by asking you, with the wide diversity of edge rusher that there is now in the NFL, how do you grade it? Is there one common specific positional trait, or do you kind of isolate guys into whether you think they're edges, speed rushers, or power, or what scheme? Just tell me how you kind of take this large, diverse group of prospects and grade them.
Well, it's all of that, Geoff, quite honestly, because they do come in different shapes and sizes, and they are deployed differently in college. So then you have to look at their college tape and see how will they be deployed in the NFL. So one of the things you start with is, first of all, I get their measurements, their measurables, because you can kind of see that from just looking at the tape, but you'd like to have those numbers in front of you. Not just height and weight, but things like arm length are things that do matter. Sometimes shorter guys can have really long arms, like Azeez Ojulari is under 6'3", but has ridiculously long arms, and that matters. But then one thing, maybe the first thing you look at, or I look at, I don't know how other people do it, when I pop on the tape, is where does a player line up? You know, we say defensive end. And I think in the minds of many fans, guys, that conjures up a particular image. Oh, he lines up wide, he's a defensive end. Well, that's not always the case. There's different defensive end positions, without going into all the numbers, the way they're actually cataloged by defensive coaches and line designations. We don't need to get into all those specifics, but the point is where they line up matters, because that impacts how they rush the quarterback. The closer you are to the offensive tackle, the less space you have. So you're not likely to be able to generate a speed to power rush if there's not very much space between you and the offensive tackle. You need space to generate speed to power. You need room and length to generate velocity to generate that speed. So some defensive ends in college, they might line up right over an offensive tackle. They might line up just outside of them. Some do line up wide. There they have space. That impacts the techniques that they use to rush the quarterback, Geoff. Mm-hmm. So you start there. Where do they line up? And what does that mean for how they will be asked to rush the quarterback? Because technique, hand usage, footwork, you guys probably remember Trey Thomas during the season talking about where defensive ends line up and their stance. You have to look at that to start.
And it's funny you bring that up, because I remember asking Trey about the wide 9, and we talked about it. Now, obviously, they're not going to run that anymore. Jim Schwartz is gone. But we also talked about shorter guys. And he said, man, those little guys they could bend, they could get lower, So when you and I, Greg, have talked about this for many years. There's been this separation from college scouting and pro scouting. The college guys sometimes don't know the pro scouting as much unless they've had exposure to it, and vice versa. But you're one of the few people that I know that does both.
Right.
So when you watch, and you just talk about the burst and bend and all that and hand usage, how much does level of competition? You and I have talked about over the years about some of these quarterbacks. Sometimes they just don't go it. They're never rushed. So they always have that pocket, and you don't know how they'll work on a rush at the next level. So have you noticed some guys, hey, this guy was great, but who did he really go up against? Or are you just grading what you see?
it's a combination, Adam. You start with traits. I'll give you a great example. Ellerson Smith, Northern Iowa. I don't know if it's a name you guys have heard. Obviously, Northern Iowa is not a Power 5 school, but this kid has really good measurables. He's over 6'6". He weighs about 255. He's long. He's athletic. He can bend. He lined up in multiple spots, so you see him in rush the quarterback in different ways. But the level of competition he played against in his conference, which I believe was the Missouri Valley Conference, the level of left tackle competition was not very good. So now, and this is a decision teams have to make. This is above my pay grade, guys. But you have to decide when you watch him. Yes, you like the traits, you like the attributes. Is that going to work in the NFL? It's likely the reason a player like that, because he does have strong traits, will not be a top 35 pick, because you'll draft him with the hope that, man, let's get this guy to play with those traits in the NFL. But the traits are present. But you do have to look at the level of competition with who he's playing against.
I mean, he's 6'6".
It's not going to happen quite that easily in the NFL.
Right. Because guys that long, over 6'6", arm 34.
And he's fluid.
Yeah, and the tape looks good. That's interesting. That's a guy I was not aware of. I'm glad you mentioned.
I can probably tell you. I think all pro days are done. So yeah. I'm just going to pull it up right now in my notes. Yes, his arm length was 33 1/4, which is pretty good. Mm-hmm. Long wingspan, 83 inches. Really ran well, 4.78. Incredible vertical jump for a 6'6" 1/4, 252-pound kid. His vertical jump was over 41 inches. So people are going to look at these. They do these things for a reason. Yes, they're not playing football, but they do these things for a reason. So they matter when people make their evaluations. It's different teams will ascribe different relative degrees to these kinds of things, but they do matter. Otherwise, they wouldn't do these things.
Right.
So, Greg, like when we hear about pass rushers, especially edge rushers, what we commonly hear is burst, first step off scrimmage, and then bend, their ability to get around and the corner. But give me something. How important is hand usage and hand technique, and what are some other traits that maybe we don't hear about as much that you really look for?
Hand usage is critical, because here's the bottom line in the NFL. You can have great bend and flexibility, what we like to call motorcycle lean. You can all picture that. It's a good visual, I think. That's a great trait to have. If you have that trait, you're automatically going to start moving up people's boards. But you're not just going to win in the NFL doing that. You can't win in the NFL with one move, because eventually what's going to happen if you're just a speed edge rusher with great lean is the good offensive tackle just push you right past the quarterback. That's the way it works in the NFL. So you look for a couple of other things, Geoff, like you said. How do you use your hands? Because the bottom line is you're going to be contacted by offensive tackles. This is the NFL. You don't just run by guys. So what happens? Are you proactive in creating that contact with your hands? Or are you more reactive? In other words, do you want them to contact you because you're so good then playing off their contact? That all comes with how you use your hands. There's all kinds of different moves. There's swipes, there's rips, we've all seen the arm over move or the swim move. It's how you put those moves together based on what you see. That's why I had a great talk when he was in our broadcast boot camp with DeMarcus Ware, who educated me on everything about offensive tackles, their stance, their first step. When did they start to use their hands? Did they start to use their hands early? Did they wait and keep their hands low and bring them up late? All these things factor into how you rush the quarterback and what hand techniques you use to respond to the tackle you're playing against. And then you must have counters. So in other words, let's say you're a great edge rusher, okay? If you're Von Miller and you can win off the edge, you know going into a game that offensive tackle that you're playing against, he is going to be so worried about you beating him at the top of the arc off the edge that you know he's going to overset, meaning he's going to so quickly turn to the sideline because he does not want you beating him off the edge. So now you know that going in. So you keep working throughout the game to set him up. You need a move inside. Once you see him overset, You have an inside counter. Now, here's an example of a guy, everybody in Philadelphia can picture this. He wasn't a speed rusher, but he was one of the greatest of all time, Reggie White. Reggie White had an unbelievable knack for feeling when an offensive tackle's outside foot would lift off the ground. Okay. And then he would do that hump move that everybody is so familiar with. It's why he could take a 320-pound man and literally with one arm push him to the ground. Because if you watch the tape, you'll notice he did that when the offensive tackle's foot was off the ground. So he was on one leg. I mean, there's a knack for it. This is all worked on, coached, taught, practiced. This is, it's like anything in football. These things don't just happen. Coaches don't just say to a pass rusher, let's go out today and rush the quarterback. All this stuff has to be worked on. And you see a lot of players come into the NFL, pass rushers, edge players, who have been so good with one particular thing in college, they're going to need to expand on that and increase their repertoire to become really good in the NFL. Some guys never expand on that, and that's why we say, boy, they're really athletic, but it just never worked out.
Greg, we know that your roots in the quarterback position. You learn from Ron Jaworski and others, but how did you kind of learn how to watch and grade tape for pass rushers? Because you did such a brilliant job of breaking this down. I don't think you just pull it out of the sky. You had to learn from people when you were first watching tape.
I've learned. Yeah. Adam, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I've made it a point all through the years to talk to different coaches, coaches at different positions, many different people, because that's the only way you can learn. When I started watching coaching tape, which was, I believe, 1991 or 92, I didn't know anything about really watching coaching tape, but I made it a point to treat it as an intellectual and academic exercise and to just keep learning and learning and learning. And you're always learning. See, that's the thing. That's the approach I take. I'm sure a D-line coach could tell you 5 or 10 more things that I totally left out. But the point I was trying to make was that it's not just let's go out there and rush the quarterback. I mean, some examples of guys who are phenomenal playing off contact are the Bosa brothers. They're so good at they create the contact, and then they're so good at playing off the contact. And you have to be able to do that to rush the quarterback. You can't just win in this league purely on speed.
Now, is Jadavian Clowney a type of guy that goes back to your reference about not having more than one move in the arsenal or being a little bit limited in a pass?
Well, he's not it's so funny because he's been in the news, and I don't know, Adam, you may know what's going to happen in Cleveland. I don't. I saw that yesterday about him being possibly signing with Cleveland. Maybe it's happened already. I don't know. But he's not a good pass rusher for a number of reasons. And people keep saying he's a pass rusher. He's never been a good pass rusher. And one reason he's not, and this is something else that plays into just traits you'd like to have, is he's very stiff in his core. So while he's a very strong man and can once in a while have a speed to power and just use his pure strength, because he is a strong, strong man, but he can't bend. So, and he also can't put moves together because he doesn't have that flexibility in his core and his hips. So he's never really been a strong pass rusher off the edge. He's always had to be schemed. And by the way, the league is telling you this. This would be his 4th or 5th team, and he's not even 28 years old. If he was a great pass rusher, he would not be on his 4th or 5th team under the age of 28.
Sure. Can you give me, on the other hand, because you're talking about it, just over the last 5, 6, 7 years, somebody whose tape coming out of college into the draft just blew away. Just give me someone who really got out to you.
I'm trying to think. I'm just going to turn around here and look. I'm not
sure, we'll let you do that.
I'm just looking at the teams in the league. Let's see. Big time pass rush.
You know what I want to ask you about?
Go ahead.
Cam Jordan is so underrated. Not a lot of people talk about him.
Agree.
Why is he so good, Greg?
See, to me, he's really good because I think he's one of those guys that knows how to play off contact extremely well, and he knows how to set up the people he's playing against. He knows how to get them to react in the way he wants them to react and then play off that, because he's not a motorcycle leaner. He's not Von Miller. Right? He's not that guy. So that most things in the NFL, look, are there a few guys who are transcendent talent-wise? You know, the Von Millers, when he's healthy, is transcendent rushing the quarterback off the edge. There's not 10 of those guys, you know. So ultimately, guys need to develop a skill set to rush the quarterback. Traits, a skill set, nuance, subtlety, just like any position. And that's what ultimately makes guys really good pass rushers. Here, I'll give you an example.
I knew where I was going to go. I knew we were going to.
Chase Young's very recent, but
Okay.
you knew he was going to be a great pass rusher.
Mhm.
And by the way, the D-line coach at Ohio State, Larry Johnson, is really well known
You're
for
hurting
being
me.
a great teacher of pass rush. I mean, the Boses came from there.
Yep.
Chase Young, but Chase Young, who I've been around, I've seen him in person. I mean, he's just ridiculous. He looks the part in about the best way you could look the part. But he also knows how to rush the quarterback. So I know he's very recent, but he's someone who really stands out.
You just burned me, Greg. You know I'm a Penn State guy, and that's where Larry Johnson first came from. And
Yeah.
he turned out a lot of great D-line prospects there.
Well, I'll
before
give
he
you an
went over to
example
Ohio
from this
State.
year, talking about Penn State. And that's what I love about doing this with you guys, is we just kind of go free form.
Sure.
Jayson Oweh from Penn State
Yep.
this year. He's an athletic freak. I mean, I put on his tape, and I've been doing this a long time, gentlemen, as you well know, okay? This kid is an athletic freak. Okay, the tape, you put it on, and you go, oh my God, this guy, I've never seen a guy move like this before.
Oh, man.
And his thighs, he was 6'5", 257. We know that the 40-yard dash times were probably a bit extreme this year,
Yeah.
but he ran a 4.39. So let's say it was going to be a 4.45.
Yeah.
You gotta remember
Still
how
ridiculous.
big this guy is.
Yeah.
You know, his vertical jump was almost 40. His arm length is over 34. This guy's a freak. Now, he didn't have any sacks this year, but he had a lot of pressures. This guy has every physical and athletic trait that you could possibly want for an edge player. Now, he needs to be coached a little bit. I don't know anything about the kid. You know, I can't speak to that. But you just look at this guy and say, if it all comes together, there's not going to be many guys like this. Now, does that mean he's going to get 20 sacks a season? Who knows? You know, none of us can answer that. But this guy's a freak. He's a physical, athletic freak for his size.
Because it's funny, I was going to ask you about him, and Kwity Paye is a guy that a lot of people think would go higher, but when hearing you talk about Oweh, I mean, at this next level, Greg, when you've seen guys like this in college, maybe they're not the most developed pass rushers. You and I have talked over the years about how important coaching is. Let's take this kid, for example. What could his ceiling be just based on your tape study?
For Kwity, for
Oweh.
Jayson Oweh?
Yeah.
Oh, I think Oweh's ceiling could be really high level. I mean, really high level. Again, now you get caught up in, you know, people tend to look at sack numbers, and I get it. You know, they're not studying every play in great detail. They don't see pressures. They don't see whether he beat a guy. I mean, you know, that's why watching full games for me becomes so important, particularly for defensive linemen and linebackers, because their stat numbers end up not being that relevant. And I think Oweh could be the kind of guy that, if you're a 4-3 team like the Eagles, who are now going to be very much like Minnesota's defense, you could look at him. I think even the teams that play a lot of 3-4-5-2 fronts could see him as an outside linebacker because he's so long and athletic. So I think it just depends on your scheme and how you see him. But he is incredibly flexible. He's such a loose-limbed athlete. He's got easy core direction change. I mean, he can bend. He's twitchy. There's really not much this kid can't do athletically.
Let me tell you something, folks. I've known Greg for nearly 20 years. I've heard him excited about players, usually quarterbacks. I'm a little bit.
I think I found the answer to my question about some guy's tape who really knocked his socks off over the last
oh my
few
God.
years.
And that was a pro
Well,
guy,
it's just
right?
the athleticism. You know, he kind of he kind of reminded me of Caplan, you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't want to. What his 10 was so good. I didn't run a 1.59.
His 10-yard split was like that of a running back.
I know 1.59 is really strong.
Yeah.
Kaplan's got bend. We all know that. So
especially in that right arm when he's having a beer.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Let's talk about Kwity Paye though, Greg, because he's kind of looked at as one of the top pass rushers in the coming out, and I've talked to 3 people in the league about him, and they all really like him. So I leave it to you. You tell me what you think of Kwity Paye.
Kwity Paye is a fascinating guy because of the way he's built. He's kind of very dense and compact in his build. He's got a really strong looking body, but he's a plus athlete. He is not a poor athlete by any means. There are times he's looked sudden in his movement. He could redirect. He could change a direct. He could direction change. You got to remember, he came out of Rhode Island, not obviously a well-known state as far as producing great football players, but he was a track athlete. He was on a state champion 4x100 relay team. So you're not talking about a bad athlete. And the thing that I guarantee coaches love about him is he's got heavy hands, and you can't teach that. I mean, he controls and displaces offensive tackles. He moves them. I think there's a lot to unlock with this kid athletically and physically. I think he could be a quality edge pass rusher. He has speed to power because of his build. And I also think he's your classic case of a guy you could move him inside to D-tackle in your sub fronts, and he could really be effective. So I think he's a really good prospect. I think I would describe his explosiveness as more methodical and relentlessly powerful than just totally twitchy. But he's pretty good prospect. Now he almost looked to me like an old school DN. One of those guys, even though he's not 290, he almost looked like that old school DN to me.
Greg Russo from Miami, Greg, is long. I mean, he's almost 6'7", 6'6 and a half, 266. His 10 was really good at his pro day, which you always look for with D linemen. But what did the tape show you about him?
Yeah, I watched it because he didn't play this year. And It's a shame he didn't, just because he needed to play. But I think he's got great size. He's got great length. He's a plus athlete. He can extend his arms, which are long. He's functionally flexible. He can do speed to power. He did most of his work in 2019, guys, as an inside player, either a 1 technique or a 0 technique. Miami used him in 2019 in their sub fronts as a 0 technique player. I don't think he's an edge player right now. People will see him that way because of his length. He clearly has the kind of length you cannot teach, and that arm extension is really good. I think his 2019 tape showed a splash player, but not a consistent player. Like I said, he was at his best as a pass rusher when he was reduced inside. I'm not sure. And again, when I say I'm not sure if he's ready. Maybe in 3 years, we're talking about him differently. In some ways, he kind of reminded me of Marcus Davenport coming out of college. And I thought Davenport was a better edge rush prospect than Russo is an edge rush prospect.
Interesting. Now, people, Greg, and I'm sure you factor this into your evaluation, teams like players who can edge rush, but then move inside in nickel. But obviously, they want you to be an edge rusher first and then be able to move you inside. Yeah. Do you see a lot of that in college tape, or is that something you more have to project whether they can do at the next level?
Oh, no, you see it. You see a lot of teams move players inside. And again, I think you're drafting Russo for what you believe he can be, and not for what he consistently showed on tape. And then that becomes in the eye of the beholder. The team, how they see him, how the D-line coach feels. Is he jumping up on the table? And then, Adam knows all about this and saying, hey, I'm going to make this guy into a great player and he'll be dominant. There'll be D-line coaches who feel that way. I guarantee it. This kid, as I said, has traits. But then it becomes in the eye of the beholder and what you believe you can make him, because right now he's not quite ready to be that guy. I'll tell you the guy, if you want to continue,
please,
who, if he was totally clean mentally and off the field, would be a top 10 pick. And you might know who I'm talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Jalen Phillips. Yeah.
That would be the guy.
Yeah.
Jalen Phillips.
Jalen Phillips. And by the way, he would fit, but again, I don't know how the Eagles feel about him, because he had his first concussion when he was age 10. He's had a number of concussions. Did manage to play all this season. Quit football, retired, so to speak, after he left UCLA. By the way, he was a 5-star recruit and considered one of the top 5 players in the nation when he came out of Southern California and went to UCLA. This kid's been dominant his whole life. This kid has every trait you want as a 4-3 D end. I mean, he's got size, length, athleticism, suddenness, explosiveness, flexibility, power, balance, competitiveness. He checks every box you want for a 4-3 D end. It just comes down to your feeling about the medical and your feeling about, the personal and the character, which I know nothing about that, but I do know about the medical, that he's had numerous concussions and other issues that will scare some teams.
Yeah, that becomes huge. I mean, look at a guy like Randy Gregory, who had a lot of off-field issues and certainly had a lot of talent, right? And then he fell in the draft, and it's been kind of a difficult
Right. His was more off the field, where Phillips had concussion. See,
I don't think Phillips had any drug issues.
Yeah, it's
no. I was just trying to say, like, the risk in
right. Well, then you have
football related. But
to me, again, for whatever it's worth, I think if he was a clean player, he'd be talked about as a top 10, top 12 pick.
Wow, that's talented. Okay,
that is he's 6'5.5", 260, long arms. I initially wrote down that a coach like Mike Zimmer would love him, but we know the Eagles are going to run the same defense, so they would probably love the player's tape, whether they are comfortable with the other factors. I can't speak to that.
Yeah, and teams are very conservative when guys have major concussion issues.
Yep.
And as you said, going back as a kid, they're going to be conservative. But we only take.
He could easily drop to late first round or out of the first round. Teams get scared.
Yeah.
I don't blame. Hey, this is not my call. I don't have to make the pick. I'm just talking about what the tape shows.
Gotcha.
Greg, the kid from Georgia, Azeez Ojulari. I know, you look at him and there may be the temptation to say, well, he looks like a 3-4 edge rusher, outside linebacker type. But what do you see from him?
Well, you got to remember one thing too, is that teams play in their base defense. If it's 30 or 35%, that's a high percentage. So essentially they're playing in what's a 4-3 front. Okay. Because that's the sub fronts in the NFL. So he came in at 6'2 1/4, which a lot of teams are going to see as too short. That's the way it works. Some teams have specific parameters. We all know that. That's just the way it works, right or wrong. We know that. He has ridiculously long arms. They're over 34 inches, ridiculously long arms, and a tremendous wingspan. This kid is naturally powerful. He's methodically explosive. He can bend. He's got unbelievable balance. I mean, this kid's flexibility right at the top of the pass rush arc with his outstanding balance and body control to corner was just maybe as good as it was in this class. He is a really good player. I should say prospect. They're all prospects. But the more I watched him, the more I liked him. His balance, his body control is high level, and he could clear the edge without losing velocity and speed. I really think that this kid's a fascinating prospect. And, again, it comes down to the team again. He's under 6'3", and he's 249. So how do you see him in your scheme?
34 outside linebacker. you
maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think teams like the Bears, the Chargers now with Brandon Staley there, the Steelers, because they lost Dupree. I could easily see teams like that feeling very comfortable with this kid.
Is there give me a D end here, or an edge rusher, I should say, Greg, who we haven't talked about yet, somebody who's kind of piqued your interest at all?
Payton Turner.
Payton Turner from Houston.
University of Houston. This kid looks old school. I mean, this kid really looks the part. I'm going to pull up his measurables right now. 6'5 3/8", 270, but looked bigger. So maybe he got down to 270 for his pro day. Ridiculously long arms. He's got size, length. He has the feel of an old school D end. He plays a powerful big man's game, strong, heavy hands. And like I said, you can't teach strong, heavy hands. Now, here's a guy that showed the leverage to play off contact effectively. He's got natural play strength. He generated power and explosion into contact. But there were also snaps where he showed enough bend and flexibility that you think, okay, we can even work on that. When a guy has that kind of natural power combined with more than functional athleticism, I think that makes him a really strong prospect. Again, He played the Tulanes, the Central Floridas, the Memphis. So will people look at level of competition? Maybe. But this kid, to me, was a fascinating prospect.
Adam, who was the University of Houston pass rusher the Eagles had in the late in the Andy Reid era?
Philip Hunt. Yeah,
Philip
he tore his
Hunt, I
ACL.
remember. Yeah,
he was
about,
so explosive, but he tore his ACL. He was never.
He was about 6 foot on a good day, though.
Yeah, explosive. Super explosive. He just got hurt.
I remember that.
It's unfortunate. One more thing, Greg, before we move on to the next position on the D line or next players. One of the better stories for the Eagles over the last 3 years is the development of Josh Sweat. Give the listeners an idea of how good he looks on tape to you.
Now, there's a great example. We talk about how guys are used in college. I'm so glad you brought. I didn't know you were going to bring that up, and I hope people understand.
I'm a big fan.
That,
big fan.
I hope people understand that you just asked me stuff. I don't know what you're going to ask me.
Yeah.
Josh Sweat at Florida State played in a 4-point stance. Now, for people who don't know what that means, he had both hands on the ground. And when I watched his college tape, by the way, he was coming off major knee injury, so he was still almost favoring that bad knee at Florida State in that last year. But as soon as I saw him play, I said, he will not be in a 4-point stance in the NFL. And plus, he was reduced inside a lot. So he played in traffic. He either played head up over a tackle, which is a 4 technique, or he played inside a tackle, which we call a 4-eye, meaning 4 inside. And I said to myself, he's not going to play like that in the NFL. He's going to be a defensive end who's going to line up outside of offensive tackles. So he got to the NFL, and that's how he's played, certainly with the Eagles. And we'll see. Yeah, my guess is it'll be still somewhat like that, even though it might not be a true wide 9 since Jim Schwartz is gone. But he has started to develop because you saw the traits in college, and then you said, okay, if he can play outside where he's got more room and more space, he can develop those pass rush skills, and that's exactly what's happened. And by the way, he's a very good run defender.
Yes, and his arms are, I think, around 34.
Yeah, they're long. He's a very good run defender. He can set the edge. He can play off blocks. He's a really nice player. He may never be a 70-snap a game player, but you can play him 35, 40 snaps, and he's a good football player.
No doubt about it. Good 4th-round pick by the Eagles from a couple of years ago.
See, now there's a guy who you had to extrapolate. You knew you were not going to play him the same way that his college tape showed. Right. So, you had to, and the Eagles did a very good job of understanding, hey, here's a guy, we love his traits and his attributes. We can't draft him high because of the injury and because of how he's used. So we don't know for sure, but we strongly believe in the way we want to deploy him, he'll be a good football player.
Awesome. Let's move inside, Greg. We'll talk about interior pass rushers. And again, I shouldn't just say pass rushers, and sometimes interior linemen or run stuffers. This is a diverse crew of athlete and linemen that you evaluate. So give me some positional traits that you look for in interior linemen that are different from the edge rushers.
Well, they play where there's people. So the ability to, play in space and generate speed with length and room is not as important. They're just that they play where there are more bodies. So they have to do a lot more infighting. They have to do a lot more hand fighting. The initial burst off the ball also becomes increasingly important because they're also playing against lesser athletes. Interior offensive linemen, guards and centers, tend obviously not to be as good an athlete as offensive tackles. Otherwise, they'd probably be offensive tackles. So initial burst off the ball is very, very important, if both in the run game and for pass rush. Now, again, alignment does matter. Are they going to line up as gap players? We always hear the term 3 technique, okay? A 3 technique lines up just outside an offensive guard. So he's in a gap. He's not over a player. You hear a term 1 technique. He lines up, or a nose shade, same thing. He lines up just next to his center, not head up over the center. That would be called a 0 technique. So if you're a gap player, the skills you look for and the traits you look for would be, different than if a player lines up head up on an offensive lineman. Then they're probably doing what we call 2 gap. Then they need to use their hands, and sometimes they play peekaboo in the run game. They're responsible for 2 gaps, and they have to see where the runner goes. So they have to control the offensive lineman with their hands and then in response to the specific run, be able to displace him. Okay, a player who's very good at that is Aleem McNeil from North Carolina State, who personally I believe is going to be a one-gap player in the NFL based on my tape study and evaluation. I think he's going to be either a one-gap, a one technique, or even a three technique along the lines of a Grady Jarrett once he gains experience in the NFL. But he was almost exclusively a zero technique at NC State in 2020, and he has incredibly powerful, strong, heavy hands. But so you have to look to see where guys line up, what that means for what their responsibilities are. If they're gap players, they must have burst. Otherwise, they're just not going to get through the gap. And if they're two gap players, they've got to be able to have strong, heavy, powerful hands because they have to displace offensive linemen.
Greg, one guy I want to talk about is from Philly. Christian Barmore from Newman Goretti. He's a guy that, look, he went to Alabama, big-time high school recruit, one of the top players to come out these years come out of high school. So we know when you go to Alabama, the spotlight's going to go on you. So give everybody an idea of how you think he could be lining up at the next level.
Well, just based on tape study, you know who you reminded me of?
Oh, boy. Well, the way you say it, I don't know. Go ahead.
Chris Jones coming out of Mississippi State.
Pretty good player.
They'll take it.
6'4" and 8', 310, really long arms. A guy, we now live in an NFL era. Yeah, and maybe the Eagles won't do very much of this because that Mike Zimmer approach is a little different, but we don't know he's coming to Philly, obviously. I'm just saying it wouldn't happen in Philly. But more and more NFL teams line up with multiple fronts, meaning that players line up in different positions depending on what that specific front is. He fits that mold. He fits that profile. I would say his game is built on power and heavy hands, but he's got more than enough quickness to make him a strong prospect. I mean, he showed some effective rip and swim moves as a pass rusher. I think he can develop into a really strong inside pass rusher. The question with him is whether he's a three technique. He probably can be, but he can be. He might not be a true three technique given his frame, but he can certainly line up there in specific fronts. I think he needs to become a better run defender, but he's got the traits to do that. So I see him as a guy that fits multiple fronts. He's got a desirable combination of explosive quickness off the ball, strong and heavy hands. He's got power throughout his body. He's a sturdy frame guy. He's a really good prospect. Again, if he's clean, I don't know, Adam, you know more about this than I do. I don't know how he's viewed by the league, you know, in terms of other stuff. If he's a clean prospect, and I don't do lists and I don't do mocks, but I would see him as being a top 20 kind of player if he was a totally clean prospect.
Let me ask you another thing back on traits that you're looking for out of D tackle that might be different from the edge, because you talked about being around people more and having to have more moves with and use your hands. Is there a non athletic trait thing that you're looking for when you grade as far as competitive spirit or mental and toughness, because you're constantly colliding? You can't use speed like an edge rusher will and take advantage of space. I mean, you could, but
I never speak to a player's character or effort unless it's blatant, okay? Because then you're knocking a guy, and that I don't do that, as Adam knows. That's not the way I do my work. Right. Unless it's so blatant that you just see a guy not trying.
There was a corner last year. I don't want to out you on it, but there was a corner you told us privately that was on tape, showed a lack of effort. You know,
I mean, it has to be blatant.
Right. That was blatant. I think
rarely will I talk about it because I just don't like to go there. But the reason I said that, Geoff, is you can see high-level competitiveness. What I like to call, and I got this from a scouting friend of mine, what I call outstanding playing personality. And you can see that on tape. And that becomes increasingly important, not only for interior D linemen, for interior O linemen, because sometimes when you're in the interior and there's a lot of bodies, it's not going to be pretty. You know, you're not looking for guys dancing. You know, this is not Dancing with the Stars here. You know, you just have to get the job done. There's grit, there's toughness, there's competitiveness, and that shows up with guys, particularly defensive interior D linemen. You know, you have to be able to play like that. And the other thing you like to see with interior D linemen is you like to see them make plays outside the box, outside the confined space of the phone booth, where they run down the line of scrimmage and make plays, because not everything's going to be right in front of you. I mean, you know, you have to be able to play with the kind of effort that calls for you to get outside that confined space area. And that's very evident on tape.
All right. Adam, did you have one I wanted to ask him?
No, that was really good. Go ahead.
That was very good. Two guys I want to ask you about before we kind of finish up here, because they come from programs that are known for either producing good defensive players or good linemen. And that's Washington and Iowa. Washington's got a prospect, and I'm probably going to butcher his name. You'll do a better job. It's Levi.
Onwuzurike.
Right? Okay. Yeah. And then, of course, Iowa's got Jadavian Nixon. So if you can give me your scouting reports on those two guys.
All right, we'll start with Nixon. Nixon is going to be a fascinating prospect because he's a weird dude. He plays defensive tackle almost like a running back. He's not real fascinated with the physical part of the game, which is odd to say for a defensive tackle.
Yeah.
But he has tremendous athleticism and quickness. I mean, he was at his best as a gap penetrator. He was at his best when they slanted and stunted, but he didn't really seem to want to play with a lot of power and physicality. And he didn't seem to show, again, I don't want to get into character, but he didn't seem to show based on tape a serious commitment to playing with that style. But he'll absolutely find a place in the NFL because not many 313-pound D tackles move the way he does. But he must be seam specific in a foundational one gap front. That has to be what he is, which, by the way, is what the Eagles will play. Because he has tremendously quick feet. He's got natural athleticism. He needs to build up his upper body for sure. He is going to have to play with more physicality. It is the NFL. But he'll begin his career as a sub-front player. But he's got the look of a guy who'll become a 3-technique player. He is really an athletic kid for that size. I mean, really is.
Okay. And the Washington kid.
The Washington kid is fascinating.
Well, I'm just going to say Washington kid.
Yeah, I can tell.
Levi.
We'll call him Levi. He's only 290 pounds, which seems light, okay? You know, for interior D line. Although, and again, I'm not comparing him to this player, but Aaron Donald's probably in that range. So, and he's not Aaron Donald, but
no one is.
Of course, nobody is. So that's a stupid thing for me to say. Not the first stupid thing I probably said over.
No, not as far as you know.
Right. But this kid, for a guy who was 290, he was really powerful. He's another kid that had really strong, active, heavy hands. And to me, that was his foundation. But the more I watched him, boy, did he show enticing flashes of first step and explosive quickness. I really liked him the more I watched him. He played a lot of snaps with zero technique for a guy at 290, and he played stronger than his weight. I mean, there were centers he just dominated with his heavy hands playing zero technique. And then he still showed the off-the-ball quickness demanded of 3 techniques. So another guy that lined up at 4 or 5 different positions along Washington's defensive front. I think he's a really fascinating prospect. It's not a great D-line, D-tackle class. You know, I don't think you're going to see any guys in the top 12 or 15. But this kid's fascinating to me with his ability to play multiple positions, the power with which he plays. And I think that there's a lot to unlock athletically as a one-gap player.
Great. Awesome. Great breakdown. We've now completed the 3rd installment of Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell. You haven't yelled at us. You seem to be enjoying this. We're good to go for the next 3. And we really appreciate your time.
You know what position I can't wait to talk about?
Yeah.
And we know the Eagles need it, but I think it's become more and more important in the NFL. Again, just my pointless point of view, as Billy Joel once said, I think linebackers become a really important position.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we saw it in the Super Bowl. I mean, I don't think the Bucs make their Super Bowl run without the play of Levante David and Devin White. I don't know how you guys feel, but
no, definitely.
Watching the tape,
Devin White.
Watching the tape, I thought they were 2 critical players, you know, particularly since they played nickel so much. In the Super Bowl, they played snaps of dime, but still they predominantly were a nickel defense. And those two guys were critical. So I think, to me, again, this is no knock on the Eagles. I didn't say it for that reason. I was just saying there's a lot of really fascinating linebacker prospects in this draft class. A lot of names I don't think people would know that I've really studied pretty hard.
Well, this is your show, so how about we agree next week we do linebackers? Is that good?
That's okay with me.
All right, that's a good tease for next week's installment of Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell. We will do linebackers. Look forward to catching up with everybody then. Of course, Greg, we thank you one more time for your brilliant breakdowns. For Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. This has been Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell.